Hey guys, thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today we're going to go over Ethereum and some interesting statistics on it. I really debated making this video, but I think I'm going to go ahead and move forward with it so that you guys can at least see some of the stuff that I'm seeing and determine for yourself how useful it is. If you guys like this content, please subscribe to the channel, turn your notifications on, and like the video. I would really appreciate that. So what we're going to be talking about today are primarily, decent times historically to get into Ethereum, and we're not looking at any type of indicators like 20-week moving averages with Bitcoin or anything like that. We're just looking at the raw Ethereum data and nothing else. So we're going to break it down into several categories. We're first going to look at, day of the week. Is there a specific day of the week that tends to be better to buy Ethereum? What about, month of the year or the quarter of the year or the year itself? So we're going to look into some of this stuff. We're also going to look at some of the ROIs on these. I hope you guys enjoy this content. So the first thing we're going to start off with is just looking at the average buy-in price for Ethereum on a given day of the week. And actually this data accounts for the entire history of Ethereum. And so the reason it's so high is obviously because of, the run-up, the huge run-up it had in 2017. And I mean, even this year, it's gotten up to around $300. So it's reasonable that the average would be around 200 or so buying on a Monday. So anyways, you can see that here's the x-axis. We have Monday through Sunday. And, this is probably the timetable that has the least effect on your buy-in price, because you can see that, whether you buy in on a Monday through Sunday, you're basically your average buy-in price of the last 4 to 5 years that Ethereum has been around would just be, or the last 4 years would just be, between $203 and a little over $207. So not really a huge difference on what day of the week you're buying. Not to mention the fact that the standard deviations on these would actually be, they would be enormous. So for that reason, I don't really think you can take statistically anything from this figure. Some of you guys might note that typically Thursdays and Fridays have been lower, but again, this I don't think it's statistically significant of a result. Now, if we move into the month of the year, so I've talked before about how, a lot of times if you're buying Ethereum near the end of the year, it ends up working out better than if you had bought it, say, in the middle of the year. And a lot of times, I think if you bought Ethereum in every quarter four of every year and sold it sometime within the next 6 months, you would have seen a several X multiplier on your investment. That doesn't mean it's going to happen this time, obviously. I mean, things can change, but just historically, that's what's happened. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. So, your average buy-in price in January is obviously really high. We're including, the run-ups of $1,400 in 2017. But really, what's interesting is just, the middle of the year. There's a spike, and we even saw this year too. With a run-up from, all the way down at 180 up to around 280. So the average buy-in price since Ethereum has existed, if you are buying in the month of June, is around $280. However, since inception, the average buy-in price in, say, September through November is only around $140. So it's literally half of that as if you had bought in, say, the middle of the year. And the funny thing is while that trend is showing on this macro level, I mean, many of us have experienced this ourselves this year, with Ethereum going up to around $300 in the middle of the year and, dropping by almost 50% since that time. And you can see that this trend has not only taken place this year, but it's also taken place, other years as well. So, this to me is somewhat interesting. It's one of the reasons why I typically will start getting more Ethereum at the end of the year. Maybe it's you could easily argue, and I'm sure some of you will, that there's no reason to to use this because you can say that the past doesn't predict the future, and as I've always said, I would agree. But just given on the data that I had to go with, I like to use it to make informed decisions, and if it works out, it works out, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But if it does work out, then it's nice because I can come back and say, well, I mean, it's what the data told me. I mean, this really isn't technical or this isn't really TA. As far as many of you guys would consider it. I mean, this is data science in a sense, and I saw someone say that in the comments, and I mean it's true. I'm not just pulling up like the RSI and the EMA or anything like that. I mean, sometimes I might, but that's typically not what we do here. But I think this is a very interesting graph. So just kind of put that in your back pocket as an additional tool to managing your Ethereum portfolio. Not that any of this is financial advice. Now, a similar thing is on the quarter scale. If you had bought in, say, the first quarter of the year, then you would, your average buy-in price essentially just monotonically decreases throughout the year on a quarter time frame. So up here in quarter one, your average buy-in price is nearing 260. Down here in quarter four, your average buy-in price is nearing 160. So it's literally about $100 difference depending on what time of the year you decide to purchase Ethereum. And really, Ethereum is around this price currently. So, I think for me, these things are interesting. I like to use them to guide when I buy Ethereum. Now, if we look on the yearly time frame, it's interesting because, more or less what it tells us is the earlier you buy Ethereum, the better, in a sense. I mean, here we have a dip down between 2018 and 2019, and of course we know this is the case. I mean, the average buy-in price in 2018 was several $100s, and in 2019 the average buy-in price is a little less than $200. But still, I mean, typically, the earlier in terms of the year you get in is better. So, to recap, if you wanted to take this data as statistically significant, which is by no means not, you would theoretically want to be buying Ethereum on Thursdays or Fridays in the fourth quarter as early of a year as you could have done it, is more or less, except 2018, is more or less what you would have wanted to do. Now, we see this type of curve, but we've seen these curves. I mean, I guess I haven't made this video for Bitcoin yet, but I'll make it at some point. But here it is for Bitcoin. If you were to just look at the average buy-in price for Bitcoin since inception, I'd note that these are logarithmic scales. I mean, Bitcoin does similar things. It increases, and then it has a year where it kind of cuts back, and it's almost even at the same slope that Ethereum is cut back. But then, Bitcoin went on to then make this buy-in price of a few $100s look like, pennies on the dollar compared to what the average buy-in price is today, where we're at, several $1,000s. So, this trend has existed for Bitcoin, a very similar trend, and it ultimately went on, to make this essentially look like nothing. Not to say that Ethereum has to do that, but it's just one more thing we can look at when managing our portfolio. Now, so here we have buy-in prices, but what's your average ROI on those? So let's say you decided to let's say you wanted to open a short-term position in Ethereum and then sell it 90 days later. So you want to sell 3 months later, you're sticking to your guns. You're like, I don't care about long-term momentum shifts in the market. I need to get in and get out. Well, if you did that, I wanted to show on here how large these standard deviations are. And the reason is because of how much the price fluctuates. If we were to look at other, more stable assets, these standard deviations would be much better. But I just want to highlight how, statistically, say, significant or insignificant for that matter, some of these things can be. So you can see the standard deviation on these ROIs, depending on when you buy, are quite high. I mean, here it's basically 3 plus or minus, 3 in a sense. So there's a huge level of volatility on a 90-day ROI, average 90-day ROI on Ethereum. But the funny thing is, if you were to buy Ethereum in say June, July, or August, the standard deviation on it is really not that high. I mean, it's more or less your average ROI if you had ever bought in June, July, or August on average for the last say 4 years, you would have basically been breaking even. So if you bought in June and sold in September, bought in July, sold in October, clearly it's not, it's clearly you can look at any given year and say, oh, well, I would have made money or I would have lost money, depending on exactly what day it was or what year it was. But on average, you would more or less be breaking even because your ROI would be around 1. It's really these, the like the ends of the year, the edges, the January, February, March, and October, November, December. Those are where that's where the most risk comes in because you might see a really good 90-day return on your investment, so around say 3 or 4x, but you're also risking a lot, and you could end up seeing a very small return on your investment, potentially losing money in a 90-day time frame, which obviously we know that you can lose money in 90 days in crypto. That's nothing new. But just looking at, say, the risks of when you're putting money into Ethereum, what might you expect that risk to be just based on historical data? Not that that means it's necessarily predictive. Well, so that's the standard deviation. If we take the standard error, so this is dividing it by the square root of the sample size, and you can see, I mean, the error bars get fairly tiny, or they're not error, I mean, they're error bars, but it's not of the standard deviation. But this is just more or less to show you, the different levels of risk associated with your average 90-day ROI. And I definitely would not suggest anyone buy Ethereum and plan to have to sell it 90 days later because there's a good chance you're going to cash out at a loss. But if we look at, say, the yearly ROI, so if you were to buy Ethereum on a given month and then you just had to sell it a month or a year later, the average over the entire lifetime of Ethereum would be you're doing quite well. Now, that's not necessarily the case between, say, 2018 and 2019, but remember, Bitcoin had one of those pullback years as well. So all assets, or a lot of cryptocurrency assets, have these pullbacks. I mean, Bitcoin has it, Ethereum has it, Litecoin has it. There's plenty of other coins that have these years where there's a decent pullback, but it doesn't mean it's dead. It doesn't mean it can't keep going. So if we go back here and we look, you can see that the average 1-year ROI, given, keeping in mind that the standard deviation on these things would be, astronomically, they would just be enormous. In June, buying sometime in the middle of the year, your average 1-year ROI, so having to sell it 1 year later, would be a 5x if you were to take the average of all the data. But again, buying on the ends of the year, so either in, say, January and February and November and December, your average return would have been 10 to 30x. If you had just bought it a year and then sold it a year later. Now, clearly, some of you are, I'm sure, rolling your eyes at some of this stuff just because, these bull runs can give you huge ROIs, which are going to really outweigh what might be happening other years. But I still think looking at this data in this light is useful for some people. And if it's not, then I don't need to make these, and I cannot make these videos on this type of stuff. I can focus on other things. But I would like to know in the comments if you guys find this useful. And if not, I can easily pivot to other things. And if you do find this useful, then I can certainly do it for other coins to see how other coins, say, stack up and how they behave. And we could compare them to, say, Ethereum and see how they compare. Do they all look the same? Do certain coins tend to do better in the middle of the year than the end of the year? I know people typically like to refer to it as alt season, but if you really look at a lot of altcoins, there are some that kind of do their own thing. Not a lot of them, and a lot of the ones that are doing their own thing are newer coins. So they're introduced into the system, into this ecosystem of cryptocurrency, and they're just trying to find their valuation, and that can take a lot of time. And so for a while, they might not really be that dependent on what, say, Bitcoin is doing, but eventually, assuming they really get integrated into the the cryptocurrency ecosystem and they kind of find their fair valuation at some point, their speculative valuation, then they will become more prone to those moves by Bitcoin. But I'm sure many of you guys saw various coins just seeing really ridiculous gains this year and other times when Bitcoin wasn't really doing a whole lot. It does happen. It typically happens to newer coins. So I think that's it for this video. Again, let me know what you guys think of this. I won't be offended if this isn't really that useful for you guys, but I just wanted to throw it out there. And it's kind of just, I'm more or less throwing a lot of different types of analysis that I do, just kind of throwing it out there and seeing what sticks, seeing what you guys like the most, and trying to run with that. So remember, please subscribe to the channel, and let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Bye.